My name is Skip Lisle, and I'm a bumpkin. A bumpkin from New England, not one of those Northwestern ones. But Mike and Scott, thanks so much for your work, and thank you all for coming from so far away in many cases. And also thanks to Leonard and Lois, as well as Stanley, for the leadership they've shown in this country. But I also want to acknowledge our European friends, because we may be a little bit ahead on some things, as Duncan said, but they are way ahead of us on having Beaver conferences. And so it was my first Beaver conference was in 2000 in Poland, and it was really a highlight of my life. So thanks again, and thanks for coming all this way to be here now. I've been working this is a 25th year anniversary of the Beaver Deceiver, a term that I coined in 1995. Thank you. When I started work for the Penobscot Indian Nation in Maine, where I worked as a full-time employee for 6 years. And so a beaver deceiver is a flow device, but not all flow devices are beaver deceivers. It's one of those terms that's very popular, so everybody seems to use it for everything. So I just want to make that clear initially, because what you're going to see here is pretty unique, and it's been developed painstakingly over a long period of time. But because the Penobscots were such an important part of this process, I wanted to start off with a folk tale from their tribe. It's about a little boy who wants to be a good hunter, but he doesn't have any skills. He's just hasn't been around long enough. So he goes out moose hunting, and he finds a big bull moose, shoots his whole quiver of arrows at it, and succeeds only in making the moose extremely angry. And so that moose chased him up a tree, and it snorted and dug up the ground until dark came, and it finally went away. But the boy had to spend the night up there. He was scared to death. And in the morning, he started to come down at first light, and sure enough, here comes the moose again. But this time it had a beaver with it. So we're all moose here, right? We're persistent. We love wetlands, and we know who to turn to achieve our goals. And our goals are to create ecosystems that are as rich and productive and natural as possible. So we're a very small fraternity with a tremendous amount of pushback from society, but we really have to work together and try to develop a common language and a common history. So that's one reason I wanted to go through this with you guys. So with that, I'd like to get started. I'm starting with a little context, even though you guys are all aware of all these issues, but I just felt it was necessary. You certainly know this, that these places are the Edens of the Northern Hemisphere, incredibly rich, at least when beavers are present. They're also incredibly rare, which is another reason why these wetlands, and I know that's a very broad term, but when I use the term wetland, I'm thinking about open marshes and usually beaver flowages. The only place in much of the Northern Hemisphere, again, where the sun could reach the ground for thousands of years, so they're very, very special, and only in low gradient areas and small streams. Beavers have a hard time damming successfully elsewhere. And that's an important thing to remember, because it means that in any given town, there's only a handful of chronic conflict points. It's not like if you stop killing the beavers, you're going to have hundreds of conflict points, because they can only occupy a small percentage of the landscape. So that fact, combined with the technology that's been developed by myself and a lot of other people, and the recovery of beavers, means that we are very lucky to live in the time we live in. We live in at a point where there's tremendous opportunities out there now, just tremendous opportunities to both save society a great deal of money with good, creative, long-term remedies, and also to create a lot of tremendous habitats. That picture was from Vermont, by the way. And so we've been at war with wetlands for a long time. We've been agricultural people for thousands of years, and we've been trying to dry things out and drain them. And so there's a lot of pushback out there, as you all know. And I just want to quickly read another quote that goes with this picture. This is from Fort Dix in New Jersey, a target range. Just coincidentally, I'm reading a book on the American Civil War, and the Yankees are down in the South. And this fellow says, talking about the Yazoo River in Mississippi, he says, it's a dreary, unwholesome stream. Its sickly waters, having their origin in swamps and being so fatal to health that it is well named the River of Death. So that's the kind of culture, I thought that was kind of fun, kind of culture we're up against. But we can turn this around. And as I said, it's a tremendous opportunity to save money. I mean, you can see this is a road culvert on a railroad in Vermont. And every time the beavers clogged that, which they've been doing for, about 70 years, we're a little slow. We're a little slow to learn these lessons in this continent. They have to move those are just resting train there. They have to move them all. They bring in an excavator on a flatbed. They clean the beaver dam out of the culvert. They kill the beavers, and then they leave until the next beaver comes along. So just grotesquely inefficient. And there's these places everywhere. This is another one of our 70-year-long strategies, to take a log truck and ramrod that culvert, and then kill the beavers, and then go away and leave a naked culvert. And decade after decade after decade at the same places. Now this is beaver dams, as you may know, are made of sticks and mud, and so they don't persist very long in the absence of beavers. When the beavers are present and I've dammed them recently, they're perfectly level, like this one. So if you get a big flood, it may sheet over the whole thing and the dam may survive. But as soon as the beavers are taken out of the picture, it becomes uneven and the water will cut through it and the wetlands drain very quickly. And of course, during the fur trade in North America, probably millions of these wetlands drained and became forested. So you see a lot of dead trees in modern flowages. Which brings me to my flow device career at the Penobscot Nation. You'll see in the upper left there is a beaver outline. And this is my friend Nick Sapiel in 1995. We thought this was the state of the art. We thought this was it. It had plateaued, this little triangular fence, which obviously we know now never had a chance. But we were stubborn, like so many people, and we kept trying, kept building really junky things like this. It was sort of a rectangular structure first, and then you'll see that little wing to the right. That's the beginnings of the trapezoidal fence concept. But at that one site, we probably ripped something out and put something else in over and over and over again. We had a lot of advantages, but boy, we still had no idea what we were doing. But the trapezoids got larger, which they had to do. They had to do because they're attached to the dam. There's none of what I call separation distance or dam leak separation, which makes a flow device much more robust. So the beavers can dam around that. And so you have to make it big. The sides are meant to create the most unnatural direction for a beaver dam. But it can still, when you add a pipe system in, because beavers, even though that one at the lock seemed really smart, Duncan, They don't do a whole lot of deductive reasoning. They don't really have a sense of the concept of hollowness in a pipe. And in addition to that, they've never experienced anything in their 20 million years. So they have a hard time adapting to that. Another trapezoid. And about the only thing that's remained consistent over time is the use of wood in the frames. I mean, my framing structures have changed entirely. And I still use steel too, but a different kind of steel. Everything else has changed. And along with it, my daughter, Emma, here she is. She's 27 years old now. So I've been doing this a long time. This is one of the first places this is in Maine. And I got a call. There was a beaver stuck in that 6-inch mesh. And so that's a problem I'm going to talk about a little more, but that's a very big problem. Big beavers get stuck in those 6-inch holes. They've been able to chew and dig their way through everything throughout their evolutionary history. So they just assume that this steel is not going to be a problem for them. It doesn't flex very much. Now, this is the type of thing I see as I drive around the landscape now. You know, I threw out this trapezoidal concept, and then it gets picked up, and people just figure it's just magical. You know, maybe you hang a little crystal on it, and that's all you need to do. But, you know, so stuff like this always will fail. It's way too small. And, you know, then the trouble with that is that, you know, it's the same way I started out, not knowing what I was doing. I just didn't give up. And a lot of people will just draw the conclusion that, you know, beavers are way too smart and no flow devices can work. And so there's a real danger of us actually losing ground if we don't build these things good enough. And that's not mine. That's just one last year I photographed. But again, that trapezoidal idea is out there, and people don't know what to do with it. This too was a trapezoid. We'll call this the star site. Remember the site Nick was working at? The little triangular, this is the same site. You know, and again, I tried to put those angles on the sides, and then I had to build the front because the beavers were building around the sides, but it was a nice deck for a while. Tribal members would go out there and call moose and have picnics and stuff, but it got dammed around eventually. And so what I needed, I didn't have any concept of what a pipe system was. And so I was totally dependent on building big fences. And then I built this, what I call a round fence, and that became a filter. I'm filtering beavers out and water in that we put on an end of a pipe. And so, you know, filters, they need to be pretty big and they need to be pretty simple, and they don't need to be too complicated. And that's really what you need to make an effective pipe system. And so that changed everything. There's one of the first ones in the late 90s up on the Penobscot Nation. And there's one that shows up in this wonderful publication from the 3rd European Beaver Symposium, Lutra. A little, you know, that's a PVC or hard plastic pipe, and so those are fine. Generally, you know, the trend over the years is to use bigger and bigger pipes, and these things just get too heavy beyond a certain size to move around alone. So the lighter polyethylene pipes are better for big systems. And this is you know, just raw steel dissolving quickly in the acidic waters. So that's something that changed too pretty soon. This is in Virginia, an 8-foot diameter round fence there. And you can't really see it, but here's there's a round fence on the end of that pipe with that trapezoidal fence. So we're sort of in a transition period here, still seeing trapezoids and combined with pipe systems. And that's in Virginia. Same thing, but you see the fencing is green now. That's epoxy coating to resist the acid. You also notice on the beaver deceivers, the frames are heavy. Those, I started out cutting all the framing material off the Penobscot land. And so we were using big cedar posts, like that. Trying to drive those into a clay bottom was almost impossible. And so then I switched to what we call pressure treated, which is decay resistant, a lot better than cedar. And these are roughly 4-inch by 4-inch posts, and that's hard to drive too. So those have gone by the wayside. Everything's gotten smaller and easier to drive into the bottom. It's very important to get them well into the bottom to resist the uplifting forces of ice, and not to mention massive floods. And so again, another sort of transitional. You might call this the pure trapezoid, call that the Beaver Deceiver 1.0. They're all Beaver Deceivers, but boy, it's been changing so much over the years. And this transitional style might be 2.0, and what I'm doing now is 3.0, and that's where it's going to end. I'm sorry, I'm not doing it anymore. It's I've been saying for years, like, when is this ever going to plateau, this technology? And I'm comfortable now. Finally got there. Yeah, there we go. There's a polyethylene pipe and another transitional. And again, I don't have a lot of time, and I have a lot of pictures. I just want to give you some sense of the evolution here. And I can't stop to explain all the concepts involved, but hopefully we'll have a little time for questions, and you can catch up to me at any time during the conference, too. That's a whirlpool at the end of a PVC pipe. And that's what develops at the end of pipes when there's a little bit of a pressure gradient between the upstream end and the downstream end. And in addition to just really poor quality, ill-designed flow devices, this is probably the primary reason they fail. And you can see my son Forrest a long time ago. He's bigger than me now. Working on this round fence, and that's one of our very first, very crude whirlpool breaks, so that all that energy is dissipated on the underside of a roof, if you will, and cannot reach the surface and make a sucking sound and be buried then by the beavers. I'm talking about the wrong things? Well, that's difficult because I'm dependent on this computer. Okay, what I just said. Where are we now? Okay, thank you very much. That was a good tip. Why was everybody going to tell me that? That was very polite, I guess, of you. Now I've advanced to what I call a square fence, and this is an early model, very, very crude. It takes a long time, even for the simplest things to occur. When you're done and they look, finished, it doesn't look like that difficult, but it's years of trial and error and just a lot of time and a lot of hard work. You see a cheesy little whirlpool break on that too, and that's my client, and I think I can see the thought bubble there. She's saying, I'm not so sure this guy knows what the hell he's doing. And yeah, the beavers, a lot of that muck that the whirlpool escaped, and the beavers, it was an elevated pipe. I was trying to protect the wetland, so there was a waterfall at the end, and just way too much stimuli, and I've made it better. Made it better now. This is the Miraculous 2x4, as we call it in North America, or at least in America. But it's not even 2 inches by 4 inches. It's actually 1.5. That's the planed size. Once they cut the rough edges off, it's 1.5 inches by 3.5, and that's you can build anything with that. It's a wonderful, wonderful product. This is pressure treated. We have such great forest products, as you probably do in Eurasia too. And this is southern yellow pine, a tremendous building block, and a lot easier to drive. Vertical posts, and vertical posts don't have to be that big. And I actually use some decking stuff that's just 1 inch by about 3.5 inches a lot of times now for a post. Put a sharp point on it and you can drive it, and it's extremely rugged. This is a first example of what I have come to call a misery multiplier. The trouble with beavers is they come in all sizes. So the big beavers will get stuck in the 6-inch mesh, and the little beavers will drag stuff through the holes. And so in order to deal with that, an industry only makes 4-inch and 6-inch epoxy-coated fencing. And so in order to deal with that, I add second, third layers of fencing inside the filter just to complicate life for little beavers that might come through. And this is just 2 different time periods. Initial, on the left is a crude square fence. This is a more modern one on the right, but this is several years apart and probably 6 or 7 years ago anyway. Oh, actually, more like 10 probably for the one on the left. You can see the big maul there. That's what you need to drive posts. 18-pounder, but it works well. Oh yeah, these are the types of sites I love. You see upstream, you see a magnificent wetland. Well, if you can't protect that road culvert, then you have to kill all the beavers. One beaver can clog the culvert, so you have to kill them all to effectively protect it in perpetuity. Then you lose that wetland. And if it's a site where beavers haven't really returned to yet, then you're not going to gain any new wetlands. You're not going to have any of those ancient habitats restored. If they're already there, you're going to lose them. That's what happens. The fur trade taught us that, even though common sense dictates it as well. So it's just so important to keep live beavers in these systems. Another early model square fence with a very small whirlpool break and way too much framing. You don't need the vertical posts. You don't need the wood on the bottom. But I didn't know that. I had to go through so many iterations of this, and every site's different. There's so many different ways you can build it. And it has to scale with the size of the pipe, which sort of scales with the size of the watershed. And so they've just gotten bigger and bigger over time. And it's a huge advantage. If you use big pipes to begin with, you're less likely to for a whirlpool to develop. And then in shallow sites, the pipes can actually act as a sort of a wall that sort of dissects the damming environment and degrades the quality of the damming environment. So this is an 18-inch diameter pipe, and you can see I call them receiver fences that on the culverts that receive the pipe system, and every one's different. But you can build them by putting those vertical pieces into the bank. It can resist any scale of flood, and they're not that tall because you want those massive floods to flow over the top of the fence long before it gets to the road. And I know that there's a lot of controversy about where and when flow devices can work, but I just don't have any problem with zero inches or feet of water. And in fact, it's kind of an advantage here because that 15-inch diameter pipe is a whirlpool, a barrier, that makes that a difficult area to work. And the pipe right on the bottom does not, the beavers just are never going to get a start there. They need a pool of water to feel secure and to do work, and otherwise they're so vulnerable to predators. So this pretty much eliminates their presence there forever, but it protects that beaver dam and a wonderful wetland upstream, which the town had previously been hammering with a backhoe and draining all the time. And this is in Maine, and again, just a huge upstream wetland that the beaver deceivers make possible. If we can just get people to stop killing the beavers, I mean, that's another issue. We still have wide open trapping seasons, and anybody can go in and wipe them out at any time in most of these places. Again, I added this slide because of that upstream beaver dam. It's so gratifying when this happens. And you can see it's an older model. The receiver fence is an older model because it's sort of trapezoidal. And then at one point that had a round fence on it, and it didn't hold up too well, so I replaced it with a square fence. And this is at Fort Dix, the military. This is the first time I've ever protected targets. All those revetments there are targets from the firing spot in the distance there. It's a darn shame that could be a tremendous wetland. I kept telling them, come on, this is a wetland restoration opportunity. Can you move the targets? But I don't think it's going to happen. Can't win them all. Can't win them all. And this is an example. Like if you have a really enclosed space, you can make it work. You your design flexibility is so great with a wooden frame, and the, the experience to be able to do that. You can make anything work anywhere. And you can see the sides of the culverts, the galvanized culverts. That's what the acid water does to steel. This is a recent thing. Every site's different, and so I have to put a lot of thought into what I think is the ideal design for that place. And this just needed a secondary pipe system. Again, just downstream there is a gorgeous wetland too. Yeah, I'll talk about that, Joe. Oh, remember, thank you. Remember where Nick was working, and then the star. This is the same site, and that's what it looks like now. Much more robust with these are two 15-inch pipe systems. I probably, should have put 18-inch pipe systems in, and then a big rooftop whirlpool break, which also acts as when the top of the filters are near the water surface, it also acts as a roof, because it's so easy for the beavers to come over and just dump stuff on. And so they can't do that either. Now, I don't worry about floors on the filters, because the beavers don't do much digging out there. They will do a lot of digging by the receiver fence, because they're programmed to dam inside the culvert or to travel through the culvert. And so I do put floors in those. Just another site. They're all different depending on the topography. Yeah, this is a very tight spot. This is right down the road from my house. But prevented the beavers from being killed. Now there's a whole series of wonderful little trout ponds just upstream from this. One thing I've noticed over, and some of you old timers here could probably relate to this, but one thing I've noticed over the decades that I've been doing this is that as my flow devices have gotten less round and more angular, my physique is trending in the exact opposite direction. This is again at Fort Dix, and this is when the water was 10 feet taller. You can always see these. Frequently, you see these chews, right? When the culvert was clogged and the water was way up there, the beavers were at the surface chewing things. And so that's my son Forrest on the other side. And you can see how high the road was. That's where the water was running over. So, if people think these things, I don't think these are expensive at all. I think it's the cheapest engineering and the greatest investment in the world by far. Most of them will pay for themselves 50 times over. As opposed to going back with a backhoes and having roads washed out and killing the beavers and degrading ecosystems. It's a tremendous loss of money in various types of value. Just another one in Maine, very long. That's a very long filter. That's 19 feet long. And so, building with a wooden frame, it allows you to build far bigger filters. You can build really narrow filters, unlike with a circle. In a narrow channel, it fits the materials really well because they're rectangles too. You don't have to bend wire, which stresses the spot welds. There's many more advantages as well. And so just again, there's Forest and just another different looking receiver fence. I mean, this is a site I'm about to work at, and this is what the town of Marlborough, Vermont had been doing for decades, only 70 years. 70 years of killing the beavers and putting so-called flow devices like this in. I mean, just even without beavers, you've already reduced the capacity of those culverts about 75%, right? But we're trying to get away from that. It's hard, though. There's a lot of pushback. That's what the site looks like now. And they'll never have to go back. Another, magnificent wetland. You want to keep beavers in there. They're not responsible for the dam there. The culvert's set high, but it's so much richer just with their presence. And then you run into really rocky spots like this, and you can't drive posts, and so you just pile the rocks on the wood in the pipe, and that'll hold it down. Right after I built this, I said, it's a big watershed. I said, I don't want to not use 6-inch mesh, because I want it to be a pretty coarse filter. Right off the bat, a great big beaver was stuck in there. And so I've since gone back and staggered that. So it's 3 by 6-inch mesh now. Another beautiful, beautiful wetland in Maine. That brown thing to the right is the old failed round fence, which I'm sure failed because of a whirlpool issue. And PVC pipes, it's just the nature of the way the streams come in there. You build to fit. I love these types of sites because this is an elevated pipe. So I can allow the beavers to build a dam on the receiver fence, and we're going to have a nice roadside wetland here. But you see that straight line canal? I mean, that's a little evidence of the war on wetlands. This is rural New York State. You see it in rural Vermont. You see it everywhere. We went down after we wiped out the beavers, and all their wetlands drained. That wasn't enough for us. So then we brought in machinery, and we just cut trenches down all those wetlands. We did an enormous amount of damage. But the beauty is the beavers can just make that all go away if we just stop killing them. Belleville, Ontario. This is a rare site where the bottom was like concrete, and we couldn't drive any posts. And so we just used weights to try to hold things in place. And the thing on the left is what I'm now going to call a wildlife door. I used to call it a turtle door or a turtle beaver door. But now that I'm trying to get away from using 6-inch mesh on receiver fences, I think that door is going to be used, otters may go through it instead of squeezing through the fence, and raccoons. And so it's going to be it needs a broader term. Oh, and one of the great pleasures of this work is you meet some of the best people in the world. And my friend Doug Knutson is here from Ontario, a great videographer. This is a pond in coastal Stonington, Maine. Again, I'm elevating the pipe here to keep the water up in the pond. You can see the square fence in the distance. Beautiful spot, beautiful spot. And just give you a rough idea of how it might look in a beaver dam. You just don't, this actually has a little bit of a receiver fence just to sort of keep the beavers away from the downstream end of the pipe. But you oftentimes don't need anything like that. So it's just the same thing, but just a pipe system. A little story about this site. A beaver showed up last fall, and they were going to kill it. And well, I got in there and prevented that, okay? The beaver built this little lodge in about a month. And then it left. It went to a better place that had better winter cache materials. But this is a very open wetland. There wasn't any perches. So we had tree swallows perching on it while I was working. Here's a red-winged blackbird and a robin perching on it. Here's an eastern kingbird with a big old dragonfly in its mouth. And I went back this spring, and it had a goose on it. So that's one beaver, 1 month. Any ecological value there? I mean, it's a miracle. These animals are miraculous. And we can do that everywhere. This is another site, again, in the same town of Marlborough, Vermont. This is what again, of course, this is what they've been doing for 70 years because we Americans are really efficient. And that's the way every site starts. And then it's a great opportunity to build a roadside wetland. And so this is what I call a starter dam. I want the beavers to dam on that. And the piece of fencing are just thrown up there overnight to keep the beavers from damming inside the culvert while I work on the device. And so I had all my 2x4s stored over on the side, and that's what they look like in the morning. So, yeah. Naughty, naughty beavers. But this is how things started to develop. You can see the beaver dam developing on the fence. And on the left there, that's wide open. That's a wildlife door that they can come out of the culvert and climb up over the land and keep going. And the aspen, I'm feeding them. That's all aspen I've put in the water because I'm trying to encourage them to build that dam. And by golly, they really came through for me. Of course, I still had to have a pipe system. This is it. So the dam wouldn't get so tall that it would threaten the road. And so that's what it looks like now, well, a few months later. 3 beaver lodges. 3 beaver lodges. It was full of wood ducks. There was scores of wood ducks in there this fall, just like that. What an opportunity. What an opportunity. And we can, there's just nothing more gratifying. We can do this everywhere, every town. And it's the greatest roadside viewing, wildlife viewing spot there is. It's a quiet road. It's a viewing platform. And I actually decked a receiver fence. That's for the fire department to go down with their hose and fill up the fire truck. Another value. Here's another starter dam in front of a beaver receiver fence. Well, a beaver deceiver, let's say, because there's a pipe system there too. But I don't use the term beaver dam analog because it doesn't need to look anything like a beaver dam. All it needs to do is to get them started. You expect the beavers to do the rest. And if you can make it solid enough that you get a little spillover stimuli, then they'll really go to town. Another example of that. And this is a kind of a unique site. It was just a big mud hole. I couldn't make it work. I couldn't make it work because it was maybe 5 feet of just muck. It would just fill in everything. And the beavers were, added to that, of course. And so I had to change strategies and just keep the beavers away from it. And that's why I built a starter fence or starter dam out in front of that. And I still need to protect the culvert and control their behavior as best I can with this pipe system here. But this is going to become, and it may have already become, but it's going to become a $1 million wetland. Just upstream from that is a man-made mitigation wetland that was completely unnecessary. Well-meaning, but the beavers are going to flood that whole thing out with a really big, beautiful, natural wetland. Another starter dam. This is just a site where a town had come down with a backhoe and just hammered that dam, and there was a massive flood, and this beautiful pond that people love to watch wildlife in on the other side of the road just disappeared. And so the town Conservation Commission got me back in to try to get the beavers to do something, and by golly, they sure did. Just another kind of unique situation. This is on my own property, where you can have a beaver dam that's parallel to a road and have it much higher than the road, and the water much higher than the road, by a series of small pipes that go underneath the road behind the beaver dam. So that's a neat opportunity too. And then I've just, you can get fish through anything. I'm convinced of that. And I think flow devices are the most efficient way to do it. Okay, I'm almost done, thank you. Yeah, and then just this simple anti-digging. You can see the old beaver chamber there. Most digging is occurring just below the water line, so if you can cover that zone, you can prevent that. Again, I talk a lot about opportunities, and you hear a lot about the opportunities in the West because it's so dry. They are everywhere in the East. I mean, we have degraded. There's so much ancient beaver habitat that looks like this, low gradient area in a small stream, and yet we're mowing it unnecessarily. And boy, there's just everywhere there's opportunities. I think we've probably lost, 70% of our wetlands or something in North America, and we can reverse that trend a little bit if we really get serious. Yeah. We'll call ourselves the Moose. I was just thinking back to my introduction. I think maybe we should call ourselves the Moose Club. The Moose Club can do it. Take advantage of beavers. This is another. I'm sure this was an ancient beaver habitat, but it's just a mowed field. It's sort of a gentleman's farm. Just a mowed field is kind of a terrible waste to me. That you can see over in the far left is a little tiny dot. And that's a beaver lodge, and that's all the beavers are. That's the only thing they're given. Drainage ditches have been cut through it. It's pretty sad. And so I mean, in addition to the amazing hydrological and ecological value of keeping live beavers in ecosystems, there's this aesthetic or spiritual value too. Stanley hinted at that, and I tell you, beavers have sustained me I didn't go to Nam, but they've sustained me for a long time too. They're so dynamic and they're so fascinating, and they're all different. So they really bring a lot of joy to our lives. And so this is my company. I'd be glad to help anybody anytime if you need it. And again, thank you very much for your attention and for coming. And I'd be glad to take any questions now or throughout the conference.
Thank you. Out on the West Coast, we've been doing some research regarding copper and its impact on salmonids. And what we found that parts per billion impact the salmonid's capacity to evade predators. What alternative to treated wood would you suggest?
Copper hurting fish is an issue, but I don't frankly know how much, if the modern pressure treated wood even has copper in it. Or I know it's gotten more benign over time, and I use very, very little of it that's actually in the water, very little, a few posts. And my attitude, I mean, you don't have to use pressure treated. Find the most durable, black locust. I mean, I was a little disappointed with cedar. I may get 8 years out of it. To me, I'm shooting for 40 years, minimum, to maximize the value for my customers. I don't want to have to keep going back. But it's a tiny amount that's actually in the water, and in most watersheds, I'm sorry to say, where there's humans, there's hundreds of acres of pressure treated. It's the rain is soaking these decks and running off, and so I would think that's not a good thing. Probably, I'm not sure, but it's a much bigger issue than a few posts and a beaver deceiver. And again, and my attitude has always been that this is so valuable ecologically, incredibly valuable, that for us to be able to make durable and effective flow devices, that it's worth, if there's a small sacrifice, in that durability area, then it's worth it. But it's a great question, and it's an important thing to study. How wide do I make the wildlife door? Just enough space for a big snapping turtle or a beaver to squeeze through. Because if you make it just an inch bigger than that, then they're going to bring in all kinds of debris. But it's not just a door, it's also pushing them, forcing them, beavers like to work in the water. So you're forcing them into on the upland. They have to drag materials on the upland, which they prefer not to do. And then in some sort of an S-turn as well. So it's a number of things, but even with all that said, you got to keep that hole small.
Can you speak to the lifespan of the materials that you're using, like the pressure-treated wood, the fasteners, the wire? How long are you expecting that to? Yeah,
I can't really. I'm hoping for 40 years. I prefer 100. It's hard to say. I think the first thing that would go would be the pressure-treated wood, and it's hard to believe that wouldn't last 20 or 30. And that'd be easy to replace, really, especially the posts. It'd be a simple matter to replace. The epoxy-coated wire, as long as you spray the spot welds, as I do, which are real vulnerable, and the beavers don't chew the heck out of it, then I think that'll last indefinitely. And I think the plastic will too, particularly if it's under the water and not being beat up by the sun. I mean, it's just so cheap. They're so cheap. One person can build it with a few hand tools. It's so cheap, and it saves so much money. With good wood, you can really make it durable and long-lasting, and so it's not a big deal to have to replace it in several decades down the road. I didn't mention the Andover case study. I put materials out there at the table you first come in, but they're like I think every town, every jurisdiction, and they were just killing beavers and ramrodding culverts. for decades and rebuilding roads. And they went back into their records and they discovered that by switching to high-quality flow devices, that they expect to save about $500,000 over 30 years. And that's not counting the wetland values and the hydrological and ecological values of keeping live beavers in these systems and protecting and creating new wetlands, which is probably an equal value. So take the Andover study. You can't take too many, not each of you can't take too many, but take those and bring them to your jurisdiction. And that's, I've been seeing that same pattern everywhere for decades. It's a vast, vast waste of money and beaver lives as well. So thank you.